I was born and raised right in Salt Lake City. I was born on a little street called Grant Street, and I was born at home, which was the way that they did it at that time. Hospitals were a rarity. And I grew up right there, and my dad was an automobile mechanic. He had his own shop. It was called the Day and Night Service Garage. And I would go up there and I'd work in there, and he had one gas pump. And I'd fill up a person's car with gas, wash his windshield, check his oil, check his tires. And when he got through, he might have maybe 2 or 3 gallons of gas, cost about 30, 40 cents, and it was a thank you. And as we grew up, went to South High School, there was a group of us, Warren Jones, Don Shoup, myself, and Ben Shaw, and we were as thick as thieves. Every place that we went, we all went. If we got into trouble, we all got into trouble. And we got old enough to not have any brains at all. And Don and I decided to join up with the Army. So we went over to the recruiting station. Oh, by the way, the war was now on. And so we went over there, and I said to them, "We want to join." And the guy said, "Okay, fine." So we gave him our name, and we signed the papers and everything else. And he said, "We'll call you." So he said, "All right." So we never heard anything. So we got a job out in Tooele. We were laborers, and then on the defense plant out there. And then pretty soon we decided, you know, this is no good. So we became steel workers. We got a raise in pay and we're still doing the same work. Then we decided we didn't want to work on that, so we quit. And when we quit, the sheriff was standing right there. And he said, "Okay, now you come with me." And we said, "What's happening?" He said, "You're going to go fight forest fires." I'm not fighting a forest fire. Either that or you go to jail. So Don and I went up on the fire line. We had a horse and a big canteen full of water, and we had to go up, and we stayed there chopping down the trees that were burning and opening them up and trying to find some dirt and stuff and cover it up. And after about 4 days of that and about 20 hours of sleep, we decided that wasn't for us, so we quit. So we went down to the recruiting office. This is almost a year later. And we said, why haven't we been called up? We joined a year ago. And the guy looked at us and he said, you signed in? And we said, "Yeah, we signed the papers." He says, "Buddy, you're in." And I never even went home. I went straight to Fort Douglas, and they took us in and they gave us a uniform. After we got in at Fort Douglas, they took us in and they marched us through a double line, and there was guys on both sides. And all of a sudden, a guy on the one side hit me with a needle, and I turned around like this, and by the time I decided he got me, a guy on the other side got me with the other one. And so we went, after we got the shots, we marched down there. I say marched, you should have seen us. And we got in there, and the guy looked at my feet, and he gave me a pair of boots. And he looked at me, and he gave me a pair of pants, and he gave me a couple of shirts. He gave me a jacket, and he said, "Go get dressed." So I went in and I got dressed, and I said, "Hey, these pants are too big." He said, "You'll fill them out." I said, the shoes are too long. You'll break them in." And I said, "This is what I'm going to look like." And he says, "In 6 months, fella, you'll never know it was too big." I weighed 125 pounds when I went in the Army. And before I went overseas, I weighed 165. And that's been a stable weight. Even today, I can tell you, I weigh 165 pounds, and I'm within a few pounds. we went down to to Stockton, California. And that was our basic training down there. And then we moved from Stockton, we moved to San Bruno, California. And they put us in the concentration camp that we called it a concentration camp for the Japanese people that they were displacing. And they had taken all the Japanese out and moved them out, and so they said, this is where you're going to be for 6 weeks, so make the best of it. So I looked at Don, that was my buddy that we joined with, and I said, you know, the only reason that they took the Japanese out of here is they were dying. They put us in here to see what we could do. And we had more guys getting sick, pneumonia and everything else. It was soaking wet, and guys could come in from a dry climate and hit that. It was more than they could stand. And we went through basic training, and from there on out, why, they broke up the outfit. I went to Sacramento, California, and Don went to Patterson Field, Ohio. And from there on, I really don't know what I was supposed to do there. I didn't do anything. If I was in school, I think it was to teach me how to goof off, because I didn't do a thing. Finally, they took us out and they put me into another outfit. It was a service group, and they took us up to Denver, Colorado, where I went to chemical warfare school. That was, I think they should have had a lot of guys dying from that. They would take you into a place, you had to get your gas mask with you. They'd take us into this little area, and the guy would say, now, this is phosgene. Now take a good smell. Get the gas mask on. Now get out. And we'd go outside, and the guys would be rolling on the grass, choking and coughing, and then we'd get all through. Then they'd say, okay, come on in, and go in there for another one. This was our chemical warfare school. Then they moved us down from there into a flight line. That was where they had all of the planes lined up. And we looked around, and I said to this one sergeant, I said to him, now where are we going to go? He says, you know as much about this as I do. We loaded up about 6 weeks later, and we went up to Camp Miles Standish. Camp Miles Standish was a export area. I call it that because that's what we did. We went right from there, and we got onto the Queen Mary, and we had to cross the ocean. All we saw was just big ships. I had no idea of what they were or where they were going, and we just marched them right up, and we gave us a color. I was green, and that's the way they tag. I had the tag that was green, and I had to find a green group, and that's where we stayed. And when the green group went down, another color came up. When we come back up, they went down. We would spend 12 hours up and 12 hours down. And on our second day out, all of a sudden, somebody hollered out to the British sailors to man the guns. And we thought, holy cow, what's the matter? And all of a sudden we find out that there's a submarine. And we looked out there and we could see the periscope coming along. And it was growing, so we knew it was surfacing, but we didn't know who it was or anything else. And so they got all the way up, and up went the American flag on the submarine. And they stood there, and they didn't break radio silence, of course, because the German submarines were out there. So they signaled by flags, and they told everybody that they were glad to see us coming and take good care, and we went back. They went back down, they took the flag down and submerged, and we went into the Firth of Clyde, and we disembarked, and we got onto a elevated railroad. I call it a railroad. It could have been a streetcar for all I know. And they gave us all a lunch. Now, this is important because they could have killed somebody. They gave us an apple and an orange and a couple of sandwiches. And we looked out down the street, and here are 10 million people, it seemed like. They were all screaming and hollering, glad to see us and everything else. And we started throwing the fruit down. And the police officers come running up there, and what are you crazy doing? Those people haven't had any fruit like this for 4 years, and you're throwing pieces down there. You'll start a riot. Geez, we like to die. We weren't aiming to cause any problem, but boy, we were sure doing it. Then when we looked back out, we could see what he was talking about, because people were grouping, and you could see that we couldn't tell that they were really fighting, but they were certainly fighting to get that fruit. And so we went right on down to a little place called Bungay, B-U-N-G-A-Y, England. And the first thing they said to us when we got out of the trucks was, don't touch any of the bushes. Be careful where you walk. The Germans have been dropping butterfly bombs. Now, I don't know how many people know what a butterfly bomb was, but anyway, they were all like that, and the top of it spun. And when it was falling, it would turn around, it would screw down there, and it would arm that bomb. And all it took was a disturbance. It didn't have to land any place, hanging up in a tree, laying in the grass on the side of the road. And if a guy walked past it and he shook it, it would explode. And it was enough to badly maim you and even kill you. And so we watched very carefully for it, and when we'd find them, we had to call the British bomb squads, and they would come in, and with a long stick, they'd reach up to the prop and pick the thing up by the prop and bring it down and set it so carefully on the ground, and then I don't know what they put over it, they put something over it, and then they'd walk away, and pretty soon you'd feel something. They had a vibrator, and bingo, the bomb would go off. And it was extremely dangerous. It wasn't like the bombs that the planes were dropping at all, but it was a harassment. People that would land on the windowsills, and if they tried to push it off, it would explode and badly maim or even kill the civilians. And we had no duty. All we did was we lived in Quonset huts. It had one door. That was at the far end. It had one stove. So you liked to froze to death. You could only have a fire at about 6 o'clock at night until about 5 o'clock in the morning, and no more fires. And it was all charcoal. And then we had what they called a tannoy system. It was a speaker system like we have a PA system. And when they called out the air alert, white was all clear, and I can't remember exactly the blue and the red. All I know is when they hollered for blue and red, we vacated the premises and got into the revetments. Now, we didn't have air raid shelters. They had dug a trench and stuck the dirt up on it, up high, and we were down in the trench. And then that was the only place we'd go for the protection. But they would bomb us about maybe every other night for 2 or 3 times each time they would come over. And the British attack, you could see it, you could watch it explode through the searchlights. The searchlights would pick up the planes, and then the fire would try to pick them up, and you could see it would be exploding to the side, to the back, above them and down. But we saw a few of them, they would hit, and when they spiraled out, you could just see it flaming, And then when it fall out of the spotlight, we figured it was down someplace, but we never bothered trying to find any of them. But it was, then after the Army rations, were critical. They were enough to kill a man. So there was a thing called fish and chips. And they had one of their stores right down the road from us. So every night we'd flip a coin and see who was going to go down there. And so one guy every night go down and he'd pick up 4 or 5 orders of fish and chips, and bring it back up, and we'd all have fish and chips for dinner. And it was great. We thought it was wonderful until finally one day we were going down there, and this lady stopped us and she says, "You Yanks, you're eating all of our food." We like to die. We didn't mean to take their food, but so we slowed down. We didn't go down every night. We'd go down maybe once a week and get some fish and chips, but we were only there a short time. And then we went down. They pulled us out of there, and all this time we didn't know what we were supposed to be doing. I mean, we were just there. And then we went down to Ashford, Kent County, and that was just off of the Dover coast. And we slept out in the open, just as bare as this rug here. And we had, everybody carried their own body bag. So if you got killed, they'd just pull out your body bag, shove you in it, and drag you to the nearest hole and drop you in it. And we'd fill them with straw, better than sleeping on the ground, except mice. Oh, you could feel them crawling around in the straw in your sleeping bag, and you'd hear a couple of the guys holler, "Oh, these damn things," and pound, and they'd say, "I got that one." And again, we didn't do too much training. We were just kind of, what are we supposed to do situation. We had Army chow, spam. Geez, we had spam for breakfast, spam for lunch, spam for dinner, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And it was so what we decided we were going to do is we would go down to the village they called Winkley, and we would see what we could find down there. And so in our going down into that village, we met a family, their name, Christmas. Charles and Catherine Christmas. So how we met them is Dell and I decided we'd like to watch those bombers fly over. So we went down into this village this night, and we climbed up on top of the haystack where we could see them, and we lay in there and we'd watch the bombers go over. And then one night we heard a voice, "You dumb Yanks, you dumb Yanks." And I rolled over to where I could see a little bit, and I said, "You talking to us? Get down here," she says. "You're going to get your bloody heads blown off." And we looked at her, and she had 2 helmets plus one on her head. And she gave one to Dell and gave one to me and took us to her home. And they had 2 entrances. You go in one, pull the door shut, open up the door to the house and go in. And we thought, crazy. But then we realized after talking to them that if they had opened up the door and let all the light out, the Germans would just soon drop a bomb on the house as they would anything else. So they had the 2 entrances. And so we had no facilities to clean anything. I mean, we were filthy dirty. And so we asked that lady if she would do our laundry for us. And yes, she was thrilled to death to do it. But when she did it, we tried to pay her, and she wouldn't accept a cent. Well, we couldn't have her doing it. So Dale and I would drop a half-crown, which is equivalent to 50 cents, down in the cushions of her I call it an overstuffed set. And every time we'd go down there, she'd say, "Did you boys lose some money?" I'd look at Dale, and Dale would look at me, and I'd say, "I didn't lose anything." Dale said, "I didn't either." "Well," she said, "somebody lost it because we found 2 and 6 down here." And I said, "It's not mine. I didn't lose it." Dale said, "I didn't either. So if neither one of us lost it and we're the only ones here, you get to keep it." One morning, about 8 o'clock or about 6 o'clock, which was common, we were all up out of bed, and we were told to roll up everything we were pulling out. Well, we had these mummy sleeping bags. I don't know if you've ever seen them or not. They're very lightweight. And when you call in them, you zip them up, and they zip right across you. And it leaves a spot here for your face if you so want it. And so we had those things, and we packed those up, and we had marched out, and we had how people found out about it. We didn't even know about it, but they all were lined across the road. The ATS girls, that was the Army Territorial Services, and the British like the American Blacks. And we had dated some of those girls, and they were all out there. And of course, ranks didn't mean anything, and so we broke ranks and went out there, and we gave our Mrs. and Mr. Christmas our final hug and give the girls in the ATS their last kiss, and told them we were leaving, and we had no idea where we were going. So they marched us down through the village and out into a barren area, and there was trucks lined up. And we got in the trucks, and they took us down to Plymouth. That was a de-embarkation point where they made it for D-Day. And we still had no idea of what was going to happen to us. D-Day had not occurred yet. And then they got us on board ship, and you had to practice abandoning ship. You're about 25 feet off the water, and you had to jump off. Full clothes, helmet and everything else, and you bailed off. And if you lost your helmet, you had to dive down and get it. And that was 30 feet down. And if you didn't make it in one trip, you took another. And if you didn't make it in 2, you took another one. And if you didn't make it in 4th trip, you better stay down because there was no sympathy. Well, I had all 3 times before I finally got my helmet up. Then they marched us back off of there, and they took us out into some field, and we pitched tents, and we were in there for a couple of 3 days. Then all of a sudden one morning, we hear all of this noise. My good gosh, guys were marching on board those ships. There must have been, it looked like there was 30 or 40 ships out there, and all of these GIs were going on there, and they were all loaded to the hilt. And we couldn't imagine what was going on. It was D-Day coming up. And we were sitting there watching them and wondering what was happening. And so those guys went over, and of course we didn't know any of them. And there's we got to know a few of them before too long, but then we stayed there for it was 4 days after D-Day that some of us, not all of us, some of us got on board ship and went over. Went in on Utah Beach, and they took us right up to St. Marie du Mont. And we had no idea what was still happening, because at this point we were 4 days late, and the Germans had all moved back, and the troopers had all moved back, so we were moving into a clean area, so to put it. And then all of a sudden we heard the old clanging of the old bell. That was a gas alert. My impregnated clothing, my gas clothing, was all at the bottom of a wet barracks bag. And I was trying to dig down at the bottom to get them out. And I emptied the bag, just about got my impregnated clothing out, and they sounded all clear. And I think it was, after all these years, I think it was just a routine run, making sure that we could move fast enough to get them out. Now, our impregnated clothing was like a piece of tin. You could bend it, but you couldn't break it. But they were horrible. And we went from there, we went up toward St. Marie Glisse, and we picked out a beautiful meadow area. There was only a few of us. There was only about 40 of us out of our whole outfit. Our old outfit didn't join us for a couple of weeks. And we pitched the tents up against some hedgerows where we get a little bit of shelter and out of the way. And all of a sudden we heard a rifle shot. And now you can tell the difference between an American rifle and a German rifle, the two shots. And I looked at Dell and I said, Dell, that was a German. And now we could hear a girl screaming. And we took off. I got pictures of where we run. Took off on a dead run. We grabbed our weapons and run down through there. And the crowd had shot this little girl and they'd nailed her right the back of the leg, right through the foot, didn't break her bones. And she was just crying her heart out. So I threw a TNT on her, and Dale wrapped it up with a couple of bandages that he had, and we found a medic and turned her over to him. And about a week later, 10 days later, we're standing out there and got her back up a little bit. When we got back after we'd fixed the little girl and turned her over, one of the guys come up and said, "Hey, buddy, look." And there was a great big sign in German, Achtung, miners. And we had gone all the way through that field, clear down to picked up that little girl and come all the way back, never touched a mine. And the next day, the guys with the sweepers were coming down and clearing the area out and pulling out the mines. Don't know why we missed them, but we did. But anyway, that little girl come back and she was trying to find the two guys that wrapped up her leg. And so Dell and I said, "Well, yeah, where is she?" "Well, she's looking for us." So we went down through the field there and found her, and she had made us 3 hankies. I have mine, and I'm sure Dell's still got his, out of parachute silk. A red one, a white one, and a yellow one. And I still got mine. I put them in frames and put them up there because that was quite a thing for us. I really can't even tell you what town we were close to, except St. Marie Glisse was just a couple of kilometers away. And then after we pulled out through there, we pulled over to Carrington. And Carrington, if you've seen anything of the pictures, the church steeple had a German sniper, and he was picking off the guys down below. And the story goes, the American, a British tanker come in, and they said, "We want you to knock that thing off. There's a sniper up there and we can't get him." And he said, "We can't do that because we are not allowed to shoot up the buildings." So a little bit later, a American tanker come in, and the guy said to him, "That church steeple," and the guy said, "I'll get it for you." And he threw a shell in there and raised his old weapon up and cut loose and blew the top of the church. Crazy. And we had our picture taken at Carrington, right there at the statue, right in the middle of the town. And I don't know what happened to mine. But anyway, there's pictures, I've seen a couple of them, people had them, showing the centerpiece there and showing some GIs around it, but I couldn't pick me out of it. But anyway, then from there we just started moving right on through there and picking up stuff, I guess you'd call it. Then all of a sudden one day, we find out that our duty is to pull those dead men and those wounded guys out and get help for them. I had never even seen a wounded man. I didn't know what one looked like. I'm going to back up to Omaha Beach. I got to tell you about this. My doctor up at the VA, Dr. Beck, Dr. James Beck, greatest guy I've ever met. His dad was also a doctor, but he went in on Omaha Beach, and he was the one that put my buddy Hal Baumgarten back together again. Hal was hit 5 times from his foot to his head, to his eye, his teeth, his ear, and put him all back together. Saved his life. If he hadn't come up to him when he did, Hal would have probably laid there and bled to death. And he saved Hal. A little story about Hal, because I think it's beautiful. Hal came home, healed up, didn't know what to do with himself. He couldn't play ball anymore. So went to school and became a doctor. And then his wife, Rita, oh, she's a doll. He hung on a shingle and he says, if you're a veteran or a soldier, I can't remember which it was. If you're a GI, I will treat you free of charge. And that's what he did. And just a little story on him. Rita, that's his wife, she was an angel. I got word from just a few months ago that Hal is now in a wheelchair. So I guess age takes over. But anyway, getting back into we went up through there and cleaned up all the messes. And then we went over and we headed for Luxembourg. And I can't remember all of it. Sometimes I get so excited about it, I forget where I was at, know what happened, but anyway, this lady said, come up to me, and she said, did you come, this was on our reunion over there. Did you come through here? And I said, we sure did. I got a picture of you. She said, you came in here, she says, and through the arch of flowers where I was one of the little girls that put those flowers on. And I thought, well, geez, that's wonderful. Then a guy came up to me and he said, you were on the back of a tank. I said, yeah. I got a picture of you. I said, you have? And he says, yeah. I said, wonderful. You say, don't you go away, he said, I'll go get it. So he went down and he brought back a picture. Here's a tank and there's a bunch of guys on it. I couldn't pick me in 100 years. And I said, oh, that's wonderful, I'm so glad. And then we rode right on through there and right on up into Belgium. And then on Christmas, that's when the Germans put forth their Bulge, and we were at Louvain, Belgium. I have pictures of it. We pulled in there and we thought, oh, look at the buildings. geez, we'll be inside of something for a change. We'll stay dry. And a single German plane came over, and he dropped a bomb, and it hit right smack in the middle of that building, right where we were going to be. It destroyed the building. But anyway, I just moved them a few bricks and moved down a little ways, and I still had a pretty dry spot. But we lost our kitchen. And that was just prior to the start of the Bulge. And then when the Bulge started, then that was when we moved out, and we we pulled up just a terrible amount of planes. The bodies, guys wounded. Some of them died because nobody could get to them. And I'm sure there were several other outfits doing the same thing, because we couldn't just be the only one. We were only 300 guys. And the first one I ever pulled out, I'll never forget it as long as I'm there. I went in there to pull the tail gunner out. And he was blown in half. And I drug half of him out. I couldn't do anything more. I was so sick. We finally got the rest of him out. I can't even tell you whether I helped get him out or not. That was a bad one. We got a lot of guys out of fighters, out of bombers. The B-25s was the worst one. I hated that. If they cracked up in a B-25, they were surely all dead. And we picked guys up off the ground that when the plane had hit, they had flown clear out of the plane. It was we figured that surely after about 10 or 15 of these things, where you get to the point that you just go in and do it, but you never did. Every time we'd see one, we'd just hope like devil the guys were all alive and maybe wounded, but at least alive. But we pulled out an awful lot of dead. It was a nasty one, a real nasty one. Then we moved along, pulled out of there, and we finally we ended up in Kassel, Germany, and we went over to Buchenwald. That was a horrible mess. We hit Buchenwald, and this was the combat troopers had already been in there, but we got in there and the ovens were still warm, and the ovens still had skeletons, and I guess the remains anyway were still inside of some of the ovens, and we just thought, you know, how could people possibly be like this? But they were, they did. And then the civilians around there would lie. I called it a lie. They would say, we didn't know what was going on, and yet we could smell it for a mile down the road. And but Buchenwald was a killing camp. They didn't take much out of there. They had 2 or 3 different types of camps. One of them were killing camps, and the other one were working camps. They would take and bring out all of the civilians that were half strong to send them out to do work in the munition factories and stuff like that. And if you weren't suitable for that, they'd just ignore you and let you starve to death. And I have pictures. One of them at Dachau, there was, I guess there was 5 guys, three men and 2 women hanging, and they had never taken them down. They were still hanging up there, and we could never figure out what the purpose was. And as we got in there and talked to some of them, there was a trench along one side, and then railroad tracks. And what they would, and I had a picture of the board that was all in color, and each color, from what we could understand from the prisoners, was each color denoted a type of torture or beating or whatever it was that they were doing to the person that had that patch. And if I'm taking a surmise, if they had a bad patch, then they would try to get across the ditch and the track and throw themselves against the fence, which was electrified, and they would electrocute themselves rather than be worked through the punishment. And the Germans were, they were ideal. They made the scaffolding and everything else for hanging the people right in front of the ovens, so they could hang them, and then after they were dead, just open up the door and shove them in. And yet there were people, civilians, that lived just outside the gate. And when we talked with them, they'd tell us that they didn't know what was going on. And yet we could smell it for a mile down the road. And the boxcars still out on the railroad full of dead. And we just couldn't imagine how anybody could be so bloody stinking mean and rotten. And then finally we entered Castle, Germany, and we just stayed there, and 3 of us, Tommy Brewer, John Gannon, and myself, we decided we would take a walk. And so we walked down through we were up on a plateau, so we went down, we walked across the road, and then we run into this German, and he had a fertilizer cart. Now, I don't know whether I mentioned it or not, but anyway, they used everything for fertilizer, human dung as well as dead and everything else. Anyway, he had it loaded up, and I thought, I haven't got a picture of that. So I opened up my camera and took a picture of it, and it wasn't but couldn't have been 5 minutes. We hit a landmine, and I was thrown out, and I ended up on a ditch bank, and Tommy and John went out the other way, and they didn't even receive a scratch, and I was all torn up. I think my old maker was saying, "This is the punishment you get for being such a stoop." And he loaded us up in this fertilizer cart. Here I am, and I'm assuming I'm bleeding and everything else, and he loads me up on top of this cart and is taking me down the road trying to find some more GIs that can take care of us. And he found a guy who was in a Jeep, and so they put me in there, and he took me down to the hospital at Kassel, Germany, And they put me on a gurney and walked me in there, and my right arm was hanging down here at the side of me, and my legs were just all shot up, and he was a lieutenant. I think he was a first lieutenant. Had a silver bar, I believe. Anyway, he said, "Well, we'll fix you up," and I don't remember anything else until I woke up, and my arm was in a sling, and I was laying in a bed, and bandages and everything else, and what a trip. I have to tell you all about it because I think this next portion of it is serious and funny. We had a nurse, a German nurse, and she was a young girl. I'm going to say if she was 20, that would be old. Anyway, she'd walk through there. Now, this is a ward. Now, you know what a ward in the Army is? That's about 100 guys. And every time she'd come through there, there was all kinds of remarks made. And she'd never say a word. She'd just go about, do her job, and leave every time, every day. And finally one day, one of the guys said to her, "Oh, baby, if you only spoke English." And she said, "I speak English." That ward shut down, just dead silence, not a sound. I don't believe I've ever laughed so hard. Yeah, and from that time on until the time that I left, there was never another bad remark passed. They were all very kind and all wonderful, but it was sure funny. I speak English, and So by the time I got back, my outfit had already moved out. This is now past May the 8th. May the 8th was a day that everybody cries and says, "I'm glad it's over." So anyway, I was sent to an outfit that was going to the Pacific, and they were getting suntans and mosquito netting and everything else. And I asked this one guy, "What gives with all this crap?" And he looked at me and he says, can't use the language he used, "We're heading for the Pacific." And I said, "Not this guy. This guy's going home. I got all the points I need. I'm going home." And he said, "Well, you better go see the commanding officer." So I found him and told him, I said, I'm a High Point man. I'm going home." And he said, he asked me what I had. I told him, and he said, "Well, you don't belong here." And I said, "Okay." So he put me in a Jeep and took me to Marseille, France. There my old outfit was still there. So I asked him, asked the camp commandant, "I guess I can join my own outfit." And he looked at me like I was crazy, and he said, "What's holding you up?" So I went down there and I joined up with my old outfit, and we spent a couple of weeks, I guess, swimming in the Pacific there, and batting away the stingrays and everything else, and the jellyfish, so we could have some fun. And finally, on October the 3rd, 1945, the most beautiful birthday I've ever had, I walked up the gangplank to go on board ship to come home. And we hit storm after storm after storm from October the 3rd until October the 20th to go across there. So you can imagine how bad that storm was. It just turned that ship upside down around and throw it back out the other way. So I ended up at Fort Douglas, and I had dated a girl by the name of Ruth before I ever went in the Army, and she couldn't stand me. She called me a peeled onion because I had blonde hair and I combed it straight back. And I thought, oh, I think I'll call her. So I looked up her phone number, called her home, and her mother said to me, she works at the Center Theater. Now the Center Theater was located right on 3rd South and Main Street on the northeast corner. And so I called her at the theater and got her and told her who I was and where I was at, and I asked her when she got off. She got off at 10 o'clock at night. I said, I'll be waiting for you. So at 10 o'clock that night, I'm standing outside the Center Theater, and I saw this beautiful woman walking out, and I thought, my gosh, a snot-nosed kid, and look at that beautiful lady. And so I took her out, and we went out and we had a hamburger and a milkshake. I met her at Johnson's Drive-In when she was just 16. And I dated her every solitary night except Thanksgiving. And she stayed home and I stayed home. And Thanksgiving evening I called her on the phone and I said, this has been the most horrible day I've ever spent. And she said, me too. I said, I'll see you tomorrow. A couple of days later we were married.